My sister used my cancer diagnosis for GoFundMe clout. My boyfriend slept with my coworker in my bed, and my best friend leaked my explicit pics after I told her I was attacked. When I confronted them, my sister said, "At least you'll be useful if you pass away." My boyfriend laughed. "No one would believe you anyway." And my best friend rolled her eyes. It was funny. I didn't say a word. That was 11 months ago. This morning, one's jobless, one's hiding, and one's screaming into a pillow she bought with my money. I was doing the dishes when my husband suddenly came home shouting, "Dan has to break up with Leah." For context, Dan is our 17-year-old son, and Leah is his 16-year-old girlfriend. Usually, I blindly trust my husband's opinion on people because he works in business, which means his entire job is basically talking to people and weighing them up. But this time, I didn't understand. She was his first love, and she's someone I've always considered family. So I asked him why. "Don't effing talk back to me," he responded. I gasped. My husband is usually a teddy bear of a human, the type to shower me with massages and flowers when I get my period, the type to refer to me as his beautiful wife in public, even when I'm not around. But instead of jumping to conclusions, I tried to put myself in his shoes, like maybe Leah cheated or something. But when I tried to get answers out of him, he just gave me the cold shoulder and told me he was going to sleep. So I did what any loving partner would do in that situation. I went through his phone. The first thing I saw on his iMessage screen was a text from Leah. An awful gut feeling washed over me. I didn't even know they texted. She must have done something really awful. But when I clicked on the chat, I realized my husband was to blame. "I miss sucking on your PP," was the last text she sent. I froze. I didn't even want to keep reading and placed the phone back on his desk. I spent the rest of the week trying to manipulate myself into believing that I misread what I saw, but I didn't, because the more I looked for evidence, the more evidence I found. He had saved photos of Leah from her Instagram on his computer, all bikini pics, ones that zoomed in on her curves. I also looked at his phone during opportune moments and saw more of their interactions. I wish I had never looked. They were filled with mean, horrible things said at my expense, with him constantly comparing me to her. Being with her feels like babysitting a used-up housewife. "Your body makes me realize I've settled," are all things he actually told her. And she'd respond with laughing emojis. And in a moment of blind rage and heartbreak, I turned our room upside down. I found a thong that I knew wasn't mine and a used condom shoved under our bed. So not only was he cheating on me, but betraying our son, and a borderline kitty fiddler. But for the entire month, I didn't take any action, because I would force myself to develop the skill of maladaptive daydreaming. Please do not try this at home. It got to the point where I didn't even know what was real anymore, and I genuinely believed I was living in a healthy marriage. But one day, it all came crashing down. I was in the middle of doing what I always did back then, trying to kiss my husband and convince myself that he loved me. Except that time, he couldn't get hard. For almost 20 minutes straight, I tried every trick in the book, and he was stone cold sober, but nothing was working. I still remember the pain I felt, not because of the moment, but because everything came crashing down. And the daydreaming wasn't kicking in. Tears started streaming down my face. My husband tried to comfort me, but for the first time, I saw him for what he truly was, a disgusting kitty fiddler, someone who needs to be locked up. But still, I let him comfort me, hold me. "You're such an amazing, protective husband," I said, wide-eyed and in love. He smiled like he deserved every word that came out of my mouth, but he didn't realize I had him right where I wanted him, and his life was about to change forever. He thought I was clueless. He thought I was broken. He had no idea that I knew everything, and he had no idea what I was about to do. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, like actual evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. I went to the store and bought one of those tiny voice recorders, the kind people use for lectures or whatever. The cashier probably thought I was a college student, not a wife planning to catch her pedophile husband. I hid it in our bedroom under the nightstand on his side of the bed. I also installed a camera app on my old phone and hid it on our bookshelf, angled toward the bed. I felt sick doing it, but I needed proof beyond just text messages that could be deleted. While Mark was at work, I created a new email account and saved copies of all the screenshots I'd taken of their conversations. I forwarded them to myself and then deleted the sent emails. I wasn't taking any chances of him finding out what I knew, not yet. I also started keeping a journal of his comings and goings. When he said he was working late, I'd check the tracking app to see where he really was. Most of the time, he was at a motel about 20 minutes from our house, the Sunset Inn. What a cliche. I drove by it once, just to see. It was exactly what you'd expect. Cheap, discreet, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. The hardest part was acting normal around Dan. Every time he mentioned Leah, I wanted to scream, but I couldn't say anything yet. Not until I had a plan. Not until I knew exactly how to protect my son from the truth about his father and his girlfriend. One evening, Dan came home from school looking upset. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables with probably more force than necessary, imagining each carrot was Mark's finger. "Mom, did Dad say something to Leah?" Dan asked, leaning against the counter. "She's been acting weird lately, like avoiding me at school and making excuses not to come over." I nearly cut my finger off. So Mark had been pressuring her to break up with Dan after all, probably so he could have her all to himself, the sick bastard. I told Dan I hadn't heard anything, but that teenage relationships were complicated. I suggested maybe she was just stressed about school. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced a smile anyway. That night, I checked the recording from our bedroom. Nothing interesting, just Mark snoring. But the next day, I hit pay dirt. Mark had called in sick to work, which was unusual for him. I pretended to leave for my shift at the hospital. I'm a nurse, by the way, but instead parked down the street and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, Leah's car pulled into our driveway. I recognized it immediately, a blue Honda Civic her parents had given her for her birthday. My stomach churned as I watched her walk up to our front door, looking around nervously before knocking. Mark let her in, and they disappeared inside. I sat in my car, shaking with rage, for almost 2 hours. When she finally left, I waited another 30 minutes before going home. I told Mark I'd forgotten some paperwork and needed to grab it. He seemed jumpy, guilty. The bedroom smelled like her perfume, a sweet, fruity scent that Dan had once told me was called pink sugar. I wanted to vomit. That night, I checked the recordings. The video made me physically ill. I couldn't watch more than a few seconds, but it was enough. They'd been in our bed, my bed, and the things he said to her, comparing her to me, telling her how much better she was, how bored he was with his old wife. She giggled and ate it up, asking if Dan suspected anything. Mark assured her that Dan was too stupid to figure it out, just like his mother. I nearly broke right then, nearly grabbed a kitchen knife and waited for Mark to come home. But Dan's face flashed in my mind. I couldn't leave my son without parents. I needed to be smarter than that. The next day, I called in sick to work and went to see a lawyer. I didn't tell her everything, just that I suspected my husband was cheating and wanted to know my options. She was a no-nonsense woman named Gloria Patel, who listened without judgment as I outlined what I knew. She advised me to gather as much evidence as possible before confronting him or filing for divorce. The more ammunition you have, the better position you'll be in, she explained, sliding a business card across her desk. Financial records, text messages, photos, anything that proves infidelity. Michigan is a no-fault divorce state, but evidence of adultery can still impact property, division, and alimony. I nodded, not mentioning that adultery was the least of Mark's crimes. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud yet. That my husband was having sex with a minor, that he was committing statutory RP, that he was betraying not just me, but our son in the most horrific way possible. On my way home, I stopped at the bank and opened a new account in just my name. I transferred half of our savings into it. Money that I'd contributed to over the years from my nursing salary. It wasn't stealing if it was already partly mine, right? I also ordered copies of all our financial records for the past year. Mark handled most of our finances, and I suddenly realized how dangerous that was. What else didn't I know? That weekend, Mark told me he had a golf game with clients. The tracking app showed he went to the Sunset Inn again. I used the opportunity to go through his office at home more thoroughly. In a locked drawer, the key was hidden in his sock drawer, so predictable, I found a burner phone. There were only messages between him and Leah on it. Plans to meet, explicit photos, discussions about their future together. There were also messages about me, how they would get rid of me, not murder, nothing that dramatic. But Mark was planning to divorce me, to claim I was mentally unstable, to try to take the house and even get custody of Dan. He'd been documenting every little mistake I made, every time I was forgetful or emotional, building a case against me. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. 15 years of marriage. And this was how he saw me. As an obstacle to be removed so he could what? Run off with a teenager? Did he really think that would work? That anyone would believe him? I took photos of everything I found, then put it all back exactly as I'd found it. That night, I couldn't look at him without seeing the monster beneath the surface. When he reached for me in bed, I faked a migraine. The thought of his hands on me made my skin crawl. The next day, I went to see Leah's parents. I'd met them several times at school functions. Nice people who clearly cared about their daughter. I sat in my car outside their house for almost an hour, rehearsing what to say. But in the end, I couldn't do it. Not yet. I needed more evidence, something irrefutable, something they couldn't dismiss as a jealous wife's delusions. Instead, I went to see my friend Samantha. She's been my best friend since nursing school, and I trust her completely. I told her everything, showing her some of the texts and photos. She was horrified, her face draining of color as she scrolled through my phone. Jesus Christ, Ellie, she whispered, using my nickname. This is criminal. You need to go to the police. I shook my head. Not yet. I need to be careful. For Dan's sake. I can't just blow up his life without a plan. Samantha disagreed, but promised to support whatever I decided. She also insisted I stay with her if things got dangerous. I assured her Mark wasn't violent. He'd never hit me or even threatened me physically. But the look she gave me said she wasn't convinced. And honestly, neither was I. I didn't know this man anymore. What else was he capable of? That night, Mark initiated sex again. I wanted to scream, to push him away, to tell him I knew everything. Instead, I closed my eyes and pretended to enjoy it, hating myself every second. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, snoring softly beside me like he hadn't destroyed our entire life. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, planning my next move. I needed to talk to Leah, not to confront her. I wasn't angry at her, not really. She was a child being manipulated by an adult who should have known better. But I needed to understand what he'd told her, what promises he'd made, how deep this went. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The next day, I came home from work early and found Leah sitting on our front porch. She looked startled when I pulled into the driveway, quickly standing up like she was going to leave. Leah? I called, getting out of the car. Is everything okay? Are you looking for Dan? She shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. Yeah. Is he home? I shook my head, walking closer. No, he has track practice until 5. Do you want to come in and wait? I was just about to make some tea. She hesitated, clearly torn. I could see the guilt written all over her face. She knew I didn't know, and she was afraid of being alone with me, but refusing would seem suspicious. Sure, she finally said, following me inside. In the kitchen, I busied myself with the kettle, trying to appear casual. So, how's school going? Dan mentioned you're applying to Michigan State. She nodded, perching on a stool at our kitchen island. Yeah, they have a good psychology program. I placed a mug of tea in front of her, along with the cookies I knew she liked. Then I took a deep breath and decided to take a risk. Leah, is there something going on that I should know about? You seem uncomfortable around me lately. Her eyes widened, and for a second I thought she might confess everything. But then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I saw Mark's name flash on the screen. A warning text, no doubt. No, everything's fine, she said quickly, standing up. Actually, I just remembered I have to help my mom with something. I'll catch Dan later. And just like that, she was gone, leaving her tea untouched. I picked up my phone and checked the tracking app. Mark was supposedly at work, but the app showed he was actually just down the street, watching the house, watching us. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. He was monitoring me now. Maybe he suspected I knew something. I needed to be more careful. That night, I acted completely normal. I made Mark's favorite dinner, laughed at his jokes, asked about his day. I was the perfect wife. And all the while, I was thinking about how to trap him, how to catch him in a way he couldn't deny or explain away. The next day was Saturday. Mark said he had to go into the office to catch up on work. Dan was at a track meet. I told Mark I was going shopping with Samantha, but instead I followed him. He went straight to the Sunset Inn. I parked across the street and waited. 20 minutes later, Leah arrived. I took photos with my phone, documenting the time, their cars, everything. Then I went back home and waited. When Mark returned that afternoon, I was in the kitchen making cookies, the perfect picture of domestic bliss. How was work, honey? I asked, kissing his cheek. Productive, he said, stealing a cookie from the cooling rack. Got a lot done. I bet you did, I thought, but smiled and asked if he wanted to watch a movie later. That night, after Mark fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and went to Dan's room. He was still awake, playing some game on his phone. I sat on the edge of his bed, my heart breaking for what I was about to do to his world. Dan, honey, we need to talk about Leah, I said softly. He put his phone down, immediately concerned. What about her? I took a deep breath. I think she might not be who you think she is. I've noticed some things lately that worry me. Like what? He asked, defensive now. I chose my words carefully. She seems to be hiding something, and I've seen her around town when she told you she was busy with family stuff. It wasn't a complete lie. Dan frowned, but I could see the doubt creeping in. She has been acting weird lately, canceling plans, being super secretive about her phone. I nodded sympathetically. Maybe you should talk to her about it. Ask her directly if there's something going on. He promised he would, and I left his room feeling like the worst mother in the world. I was using my son as a pawn in this horrible game, but I needed to start creating distance between them before everything blew up. The next day, Dan came home from school looking devastated. He went straight to his room without speaking to me. I followed, knocking gently on his door. She broke up with me, he said, when I entered. His voice, flat, said she needs space, and it's not working anymore. After 8 months, that's all I get. I sat beside him and held him while he tried not to cry. My brave boy, trying so hard to be strong. I wanted to tell him the truth, that he was better off without her, that she'd betrayed him in the worst possible way, but I couldn't. Not yet. Later, I checked the tracking app. Mark was at the Sunset Inn again. No prizes for guessing who he was with. They hadn't even waited a day after breaking Dan's heart to meet up. The cruelty of it made me physically ill. That night, I confronted Mark. Not about the affair, but about Leah breaking up with Dan. Did you know about this? I asked as we got ready for bed. Dan is heartbroken. Mark shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Kids break up all the time. He'll get over it. But you were so adamant that they break up a few weeks ago. I pressed. Did you say something to her? He turned to me then, his eyes cold. Drop it, Ellie. It's none of your business. My son's happiness is absolutely my business. I shut back, letting some of my real anger show. Mark stepped toward me, his face suddenly hard in a way I'd never seen before. I said, drop it. Don't push me on this. For the first time, I felt afraid of him. Not because I thought he'd hit me, but because I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Something cold and calculating. I backed down, apologizing quickly, playing the submissive wife again. But that night, as he slept beside me, I made a decision. No more waiting. No more gathering evidence. It was time to end this. The next morning, I called in sick to work again. After Mark and Dan left, I went to our safe and took out our important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, the deed to the house. I made copies of everything and put the originals in a safety deposit box at a different bank than the one we usually used. Then I went to see Gloria Patel again. This time, I told her everything. About the affair, about Leah's age, about the evidence I'd gathered. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer by the minute. This is beyond a divorce case, she said finally. This is a criminal matter. He's having sex with a minor. That's statutory RP in Michigan. I nodded, my throat tight. I know, but I need to be careful how we handle this. For Dan's sake. Gloria outlined a plan. First, secure my financial position. Second, confront Mark with what I knew, but not alone, and not without backup. Third, go to the police with my evidence. But be prepared, she warned. This will get ugly. He'll deny everything, try to paint you as crazy or vindictive, and the girl might back him up out of fear or manipulation. I left her office with a clear plan and a strange sense of calm. After weeks of fear and indecision, knowing exactly what to do next felt empowering. That afternoon, I withdrew more money from our Jan accounts and deposited it into my private account. I also packed a bag with essentials and hid it in the trunk of my car, just in case. When Mark came home that evening, I was ready. I'd prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of wine, even put on the dress he liked. The perfect setup. "What's the occasion?" he asked, loosening his tie as he came into the dining room. "No occasion," I said, smiling. "Just felt like doing something nice for my husband." We ate dinner, making small talk about work and weather. I poured him more wine, encouraging him to relax, to let his guard down. After dinner, I suggested we watch a movie in the living room. Dan was at a friend's house for the night, an arrangement I'd carefully orchestrated. As we sat on the couch, I cuddled up next to Mark, playing the role of adoring wife one last time. When he put his arm around me, I looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Can I ask you something?" I said softly. "Of course," he replied, relaxed from the wine and the false security of my performance. "Why Leah?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle, curious rather than accusatory. "Of all the women you could have cheated with, why our son's girlfriend?" The color drained from his face. He pulled away from me, his body suddenly tense. "What are you talking about?" I maintained my calm, innocent expression. "The affair you're having with Leah. I'm just curious about why you chose her. Is it because she's young, because she was convenient, or because it gave you a thrill to betray both me and Dan at the same time?" Mark stood up, his face contorting with anger. "You've lost your mind. I'm not having an affair with anyone, especially not a teenager." "Jesus, Ellie, listen to yourself." I nodded, as if considering his denial. Then I reached for my phone on the coffee table. "That's interesting, because I have quite a collection of evidence that says otherwise." I showed him the screenshots of texts, the photos of their cars at the motel, the financial records showing his withdrawals that coincided with their meetups. With each piece of evidence, his face grew paler, his denials weaker. "You've been spying on me?" he finally sputtered, trying to turn the tables. "Invading my privacy? Following me?" I laughed, a hollow sound even to my own ears. "That's what you're concerned about? Not the fact that you've been sleeping with a child? Not the fact that you've betrayed your son in the most disgusting way possible?" He switched tactics then, his voice softening, his eyes pleading. "Ellie, it's not what you think. She came onto me. She's been obsessed with me for months. I tried to resist, but she threatened to tell Dan. I made a move on her if I didn't go along with it. I was protecting our family." The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Save it, Mark," I said, standing up to face him. "I've seen the texts. I know you initiated this. I know you've been planning to leave me for her. I know everything." His face hardened again, all pretense of innocence gone. "So what now? You go to the police? Ruin my life over a mistake? Destroy our family?" "You destroyed our family the moment you decided to prey on a teenage girl," I replied, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "But no, I'm not going to the police. Not yet." Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by suspicion. "What do you want? Money? The house?" I smiled, and I could tell from his expression that it wasn't a nice smile. "I want you to confess everything to Dan tonight. I want you to look your son in the eye and tell him what you've done. And then I want you to leave this house and never come back." Mark laughed, a cruel sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're delusional. I'm not confessing anything, and I'm certainly not leaving my home. If anyone's leaving, it's you." I'd expected this reaction. I reached for my phone again and pulled up a video, the one from the camera I'd hidden in our bedroom. I pressed play and watched his face as he heard his own voice, saw his own body with Leah in our bed. "I have dozens of these," I said quietly, "enough to put you in prison for a very long time. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to do exactly what I said, or tomorrow morning I'm taking these to the police, and to Leah's parents, and to your boss, and to everyone we know." The color drained from his face again, but this time it was replaced by something ugly, something dangerous. He stepped toward me, his hands clenched into fists. "You bitch," he hissed. "You fucking bitch. You think you can threaten me? In my own house?" I stood my ground, though my heart was racing. "It's my house too. And yes, I can threaten you. I can do a lot more than threaten." He raised his hand, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. I flinched but didn't back away. Then we heard the front door open. Dan was home early. Mark's hand dropped to his side, his face instantly rearranging into a normal expression. The transformation was chilling. How easily he could switch between monster and loving father. "We'll finish this discussion later," he muttered, then turned to greet Dan as he came into the living room. I watched them interact, my husband pretending everything was normal, my son oblivious to the evil standing right in front of him. And I knew that tonight was just the beginning of the battle. After Dan went to bed, Mark cornered me in our bedroom. His face was red with anger, and he grabbed my arm so hard I knew it would leave bruises. "Delete everything," he whispered harshly. "All the videos, all the texts, everything, or I swear to God I'll make you regret it." I yanked my arm away. "Touch me again and I'll call the police right now." We stood there, staring at each other, like two strangers in a standoff. I barely recognized the man in front of me. How had I shared a bed with him for 15 years without seeing what he really was? "You have until tomorrow," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Tell Dan the truth or I go to the police with everything." Mark stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I locked it and pushed a chair under the handle, just in case. Then, I called Samantha and told her what happened. "Come stay with me," she insisted. "This isn't safe." I refused. I wasn't going to be driven from my own home. Besides, I needed to be there for Dan when everything fell apart. I slept with my phone in my hand that night, ready to call 911 if Mark tried anything. The next morning, Mark acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, kissed me on the cheek when Dan was looking, and left for work like it was any other day. But the look he gave me before walking out the door was pure hatred. I waited until he was gone, then woke Dan up. He had a late start that day, so we had time to talk. "Honey, there's something I need to tell you," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "It's about Dad and And Leah. Dan sat up, instantly alert. What about them? I took a deep breath. This was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Your dad has been seeing Leah behind both our backs. Dan stared at me like I started speaking another language. What do you mean, seeing? They've been having an affair, I said, forcing the words out. That's why she broke up with you. I have proof. Texts, photos, videos. Dan's face went through a series of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, then a dawning horror that broke my heart. No, he whispered. No, that's not. Dad wouldn't. I showed him some of the tamer text exchanges. Enough to prove I wasn't making this up, but not the explicit ones that would traumatize him further. His hands shook as he scrolled through my phone. I'm so sorry, Dan, I said, reaching for him. I only found out recently myself. He jerked away from me, jumping out of bed. This is bullcrap. You're making this up because you're jealous or crazy or something. I let him yell. Let him accuse me of lying, of trying to ruin his relationship with his father. It was easier for him to believe I was the villain than to accept the truth about Mark. When he finally ran out of steam, I just said, ask him yourself. He'll be home tonight. Dan grabbed some clothes and stormed out of the house without another word. I texted Samantha to let her know what happened, then spent the day preparing for the fallout. I backed up all my evidence to multiple places. Cloud storage, USB drives, Samantha's email. I called Gloria Patel again and updated her on the situation. She advised me to stay somewhere else that night, but again, I refused. Around 3 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. It was Leah. Mark told me what you did. You're ruining everything. We love each other. I stared at the message, a mixture of pity and disgust washing over me. This child really believed a 43-year-old married man loved her, that they had some kind of future together. Mark had manipulated her completely. I didn't respond. There was nothing I could say that would get through to her right now. She'd been groomed by a predator, and it would take time for her to see that. Mark came home around 6 p.m. He looked terrible. Tie loose, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot. He'd clearly been drinking. Where's Dan? He demanded as soon as he walked in. I don't know, I answered truthfully. He left this morning after I told him about you and Leah. Mark lunged at me, grabbing me by the shoulders. You told him? After I specifically said, get your hands off me, I shouted, shoving him away. You had your chance to tell him yourself. You chose not to. He backed off, running his hands through his hair. You've ruined everything. My relationship with my son, my career, everything. You ruined everything, I corrected him. The moment you decided to prey on a teenager, our son's girlfriend. Mark collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Pack your things, I said coldly. I want you out of this house tonight. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. This is night in jail instead. We were at a stalemate, glaring at each other across the living room, when the front door opened. Dan walked in, his face hard and closed off. Dan, Mark said, immediately standing up. Thank God. Your mother's been saying some crazy things. Is it true? Dan interrupted, his voice flat. Are you sleeping with Leah? Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Son, it's complicated. She came on to me. She was obsessed with me. I tried to... Bullcrap. Dan exploded, his face contorting with rage. I talked to her today. She showed me the texts you sent her, the pictures. She thought I knew. She thought Mom and I had some kind of arrangement. I felt sick. So that's what Mark had told her. That Dan and I knew about their relationship and were okay with it? That we had some kind of open marriage situation? The depths of his manipulation were staggering. Mark tried to approach Dan, his hands outstretched. Son, please let me explain. Don't touch me, Dan shouted, backing away. Don't ever touch me again. You're disgusting. Both of you are disgusting. He turned to me then, his eyes full of hurt and betrayal. And you knew about this and didn't tell me right away? How long have you known? About a month, I admitted, my heart breaking at the look on his face. I needed to gather evidence. I needed to be sure. Dan shook his head, tears streaming down his face now. A month? You let me keep dating her for a month knowing what was going on? Before I could respond, he turned and ran upstairs. We heard his bedroom door slam. Mark and I stood in silence for a moment. Then he picked up his keys from the coffee table. I'll stay at a hotel tonight, he said quietly. Tell Dan. Tell him I'm sorry. I didn't respond. I just watched as he walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. The quiet click of the latch felt like the end of something. Our marriage, our family, the life we'd built together. I went upstairs and knocked on Dan's door. No answer. I tried again, calling his name softly. Finally, I heard movement, and the door opened a crack. Can I come in? I asked. He stepped back, allowing me in, but keeping his distance. His eyes were red and swollen, his face blotchy from crying. It took everything in me not to pull him into my arms like I did when he was little. I'm sorry, I said, sitting on his desk chair while he perched on the edge of his bed. I should have told you sooner. I was trying to protect you, but I see now that was wrong. Dan stared at the floor. Did you kick him out? Yes. He's staying at a hotel tonight. After that, I don't know. He nodded, still not looking at me. What about Leah? I sighed. That's complicated, Dan. She's a victim in this too, in a way. Your father, he manipulated her, groomed her. She knew what she was doing, Dan said bitterly. She knew I was his son. She knew he was married to you. Yes, I agreed. And she'll have to live with that. But she's also 16, and he's a grown man who should have known better, who did know better. We sat in silence for a while. Then Dan asked, are you going to the police? It was the question I'd been wrestling with for weeks. Mark had committed a crime. Statutory RP. He deserved to to go to jail. But the process would be brutal. For me, for Dan, even for Leah. Her name would be dragged through the mud. Our private life would become public record. Dan would have to watch his father be arrested, tried, possibly imprisoned. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That's something we need to decide together. Dan finally looked at me, his eyes so much older than they had been just days ago. I need some time to think. I nodded and stood up. I'll be right downstairs if you need me. As I reached the door, he called after me. Mom, did you ever suspect before you found out? I turned back to him, considering the question. No, I said finally. I trusted him completely. I never thought he could do something like this. Dan nodded, a small, sad gesture. Me neither. The next few days were a blur. Mark came by to get some clothes while Dan was at school. He tried to talk to me, to explain himself, but I refused to engage. I told him all communication needed to go through Gloria Patel from now on. Dan was quiet, withdrawn. He stopped going to track practice, stopped hanging out with friends. I tried to give him space while letting him know I was there when he needed me. 3 days after everything blew up, Leah's parents showed up at our door. Her father, Mr. Thompson, looked ready to tear the house apart with his bare hands. Her mother was crying. Where is he? Mr. Thompson demanded. Where's your husband? He's not staying here anymore, I said, stepping aside to let them in. Please come in. I think we need to talk. They sat stiffly on our couch while I made coffee. I could hear Mrs. Thompson crying softly in the living room, her husband murmuring to her. When I returned with the coffee, Mr. Thompson got straight to the point. Leah told us everything last night about her and your husband. He spat the word like it tasted bad. We're going to the police. I wanted to tell you first, out of respect. I nodded, surprisingly calm. I understand. I've been gathering evidence myself. I can share what I have with you or directly with the police. Mrs. Thompson looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, much like Dan's had been. Did you know all this time? No, I said firmly. I only found out about a month ago. I've been trying to figure out how to handle it since then. Mr. Thompson's jaw clenched. By not going to the police? By letting him continue to... He couldn't finish the sentence. By protecting my son, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. And by gathering enough evidence that Mark couldn't wriggle out of it, that Leah wouldn't have to be the only witness. They seemed to deflate a little at that. They were parents too. They understood. How is she? I asked softly. Mrs. Thompson shook her head, confused, angry. She thought they were going to run away together after she turned 18, that he was going to leave you for her. The delusion was so typical, so predictable, it would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Mark had played from the Predator's handbook, word for word. We're getting her therapy, Mr. Thompson added, and transferring her to a different school next semester. I nodded. That sounds like a good plan. Dan's struggling too. I'm looking into therapy for him as well. We talked for a while longer, comparing notes on what we knew, what evidence we had. By the time they left, we had a plan. We would go to the police together, present our evidence as a united front. Mark wouldn't be able to pit us against each other or claim any of us were lying out of spite. That night, I sat Dan down and told him about the Thompsons' visit and our decision to go to the police. I want you to be prepared, I said gently. This is going to be hard. People will talk. There might be new stories. Your friends might find out. Dan nodded, his face serious. I know, but he needs to pay for what he did. To Leah, to you, to me, to all of us. I reached out and took his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. We'll get through this together, okay? Whatever happens. He squeezed my hand back. I know, Mom. The next day, we met the Thompsons at the police station. Leah was with them, looking small and young in an oversized sweater. She couldn't meet my eyes or Dan's. I felt a surge of pity for her, despite everything. She was just a kid who'd been manipulated by someone who should have protected her. We spent hours giving statements, turning over evidence, answering questions. It was exhausting and humiliating, having to describe in clinical detail what my husband had done, what I'd found. But by the end, the detective assured us they had more than enough to arrest Mark. We'll pick him up tonight, she said, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. You might want to prepare yourselves. These cases can get messy. We nodded, all of us worn out but relieved that something was finally happening. As we left the station, Leah suddenly broke away from her parents and approached Dan and me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. Dan stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he simply nodded and walked to the car. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, a start. Mark was arrested that night at the hotel where he'd been staying. It made the local news. Prominent businessman arrested for statutory RP. Our names weren't mentioned to protect Dan and Leah as minors, but people in our community figured it out quickly enough. The next few months were hard, really hard. There were whispers when I went to the grocery store. Dan had to deal with stares and gossip at school. Mark's parents refused to believe he'd done anything wrong, blaming me for setting him up, blaming Leah for seducing him, but we survived. Dan started therapy, which helped him process his anger and betrayal. I filed for divorce, with Gloria Patel making sure I got everything I deserved, the house, half of Mark's retirement, substantial alimony. Mark didn't contest any of it. His lawyer advised him that fighting the divorce while facing criminal charges would only make things worse for him. 6 months after that terrible night when I confronted Mark, he accepted a plea deal. 5 years in prison, sex offender registration for life, no contact with Leah or any minors. It wasn't enough, not really, but it spared Leah and Dan from having to testify in court. Life slowly began to find a new normal. Dan graduated elevated school and got accepted to Michigan State, ironically, where Leah had wanted to go. She ended up choosing a school out of state, which was probably for the best. One night, about a year after everything happened, Dan and I were having dinner together. He was home from college for the weekend, and I'd made his favorite lasagna. I saw Leah today, he said, casually, taking a bite of garlic bread. At the mall. She's home visiting her parents. I put down my fork, watching his face carefully. How was that? He shrugged. Weird. but not as bad as I thought it would be. We talked for a few minutes. She's doing okay. Therapy helped her too. I nodded, relieved that he could talk about her without that look of pain crossing his face. That's good. She asked about you, he added. Wanted to know if you were doing all right. I smiled slightly. That was decent of her. Dan nodded, then looked at me seriously. Are you? Doing all right, I mean? I considered the question. Was I all right? My marriage had imploded in the most horrific way possible. My husband was in prison. My son had been traumatized. Our family name had been dragged through the mud, but I was still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. Yeah, I said finally. I think I am. And sitting there with my son in our home that was finally peaceful again, I realized it was true.